Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Flynn, and I'm here with
Scott Lang.
And we are the Band Dads. Here to bring you a podcast about something that we care very dearly about, which is music education and band.
Some of you are here because you want to learn about all things band. Some of you are here because you want to see a train wreck. And the answer is yes to both of those. We don't care why you're here. We're going to answer all the questions. We're going to say the things you're thinking. We're going to debunk all the myths.
Yep. This is the Band Dads Podcast.
The podcast by and for confused band parents.
Nice. You said the tagline. It's fun. That's the fun of computers. And, you know.
Fun? Is that what you call it?
Fun. That's the fun. And I don't know if that's just, being Windows, I have to troubleshoot every single every little single component of everything all the time,
I'm sorry. I don't have Mac empathy. I just don't, because it's a choice. I love me a Mac. All right. So
there is a choice.
I know you. Okay. Would you say we know each other fairly well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you say that we have a good rapport?
I would say we have a great rapport.
Would you say that I can ask you almost anything and not offend you?
I'm just trying to. I'm recording. That's the problem. This is actually recording, so I want to think about that.
Have to answer.
Generally, yes.
Okay.
I would like to think that, yes.
Well, I have a question for you then.
Okay.
Chris, personally,
yes.
Just a preference of Chris Flynn.
Yes.
I can't believe I'm going to ask you this.
Uh-oh.
How many whips is too many whips?
So, Scott Lang, there's a couple different ways I can look at answering your question.
Is there a such thing as too many whips?
Well, I guess it depends on your reason for owning them. Do I have the utility purpose? Am I some sort of...
You don't have a horse.
I was going to say, what profession
you don't have a horse.
I don't have a horse.
No, and you're not training falcons or anything.
I'm going to say, so if I don't have a professional reason to require whips, probably one. I think one's enough. I don't think you need more than one. It's an interesting question, Scott. Can I ask why you're asking me this question? Because it is a little out of left field.
Because the person we're about to talk about left behind and specifically bequeathed them. This wasn't they found them. Bequeathed them to his museum in Melbourne, Australia. His collection of over 70 whips that he had accumulated.
I don't even know how to process
for
that.
Personal use, one would assume. I don't even know how to
process the fact that you would own 70 whips. For what purpose, I have no clue whatsoever.
Oh, I think you have a clue, Chris.
At this point in time, I'm going to be naive and pretend I don't. But man, how do I say this? I don't want to say anything inappropriate, but the sheer balls it would take to bequeath them to a museum?
Unapologetically.
Who wants that? Wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what we think might be a new series called Offbeat. I'm Scott Lang.
Chris Flynn.
And we're the Band Dads that are scarred.
Folks, this is this series is born out of a previous conversation that we had during I think it was Band Around the World episode where Scott and I were talking about the origins of some things, and he mentioned how interesting of a character Percy Grainger was, and we alluded to this a couple times, saying, "Hey, we should make this a series. We should talk about people like that because it's one thing to talk about boring band things all the time. Maybe we bring you something interesting and talk about some of the people who are responsible for the history of music and music education and some of the things we teach our kids." And apparently some of those people own a lot of whips. So we're going to go into the story of Percy
Folks, let me
Grainger.
give you a little bit of background on Percy Aldridge Grainger. And before we get to the quirk and the weird and the odd, please know that, number one, Percy Aldridge Grainger is my favorite composer on the planet. I named my dog Percy Aldridge Grainger. Right. My very first dog, Grainger. And Percy Aldridge Grainger is widely considered the greatest composer to have ever lived and ever have written, if not just classical music, certainly music for wind band, which is where Percy Aldridge Grainger starts. And I want to start with one piece in particular, and Chris will do his magic and phase in. And it's called Lincolnshire Posy.
Yes.
And Lincolnshire Posy is probably, if not the seminal, among the 3 to 5 seminal works for wind band that were ever written. It's a 5-movement work. And what he did, Percy Grainger, was you'll appreciate this, Chris. He took a wax recording device as a backpack, and he went into the wilderness of England and recorded indigenous people singing their indigenous folk songs. Now, it's really interesting. Now, think about this. A wax recording.
Right.
Like, this is not like a digital. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I should have looked that up before we went live. But what makes this so brilliant is, obviously, most people don't have perfect pitch. Obviously, most people can't, sing alongside a metronome and be perfectly in time. He didn't gloss over the imperfections. He recorded them. There's one piece, for lack of a better term, it's written in 3/8. Well, I'm sure the folk song's actually in 2/4, but the person couldn't keep time, so Percy wrote it out of time.
In that same imperfection.
If you hear a wrong note, it's not a wrong note. That's what the person sang, so that's what's now in the recording.
Interesting.
So he did this seminal work, and Lincolnshire Posy, and it is truly the work that everyone should be exposed to as a part of wind band. When I was doing my undergraduate in conducting, the way it was shared with me by my professors, this is considered the only perfect work ever to have been written.
Perfect work.
Perfect work.
Wow. What makes it perfect?
Well, obviously you can't call something perfect because it's a piece of art and it's subjective. But what's interesting about Percy Grainger, which I just love about Percy Grainger, I'm going to try and figure out a way to explain it that'll make sense to your audience members. The best example I can give is he did the unusual and he did the unusual and the unexpected with music, but did it in such a purposeful way to get a sound that only he has ever gotten. So to give you an example, a piccolo plays high, and a tuba plays low.
Right.
Not in Percy Grainger's music. The piccolo's below the tuba, and the tuba's up 3 octaves where it's almost impossible to play. And you normally would take a saxophone and put it with a French horn because they have a similar tone quality. That's not what Percy Aldridge Grainger did.
Interesting.
He did everything in the third clarinet, which is normally the easier part, and the lower part is above the first clarinet, and it's harder. Huh. Like, everything he did was to get a very unique and purposeful sound that only he could hear in his ears.
Okay.
And when played well, there is no music like it on the planet.
Oh, wow.
Not just melodically, but tonally. Huh. It's spectacular. So I'm going to name drop some works throughout this entire podcast, and Chris will drop them in. Yeah. The first is Lincolnshire Posy, and do Lord Melbourne and use the Dallas Wind Symphony recording.
Okay.
It is stunning. Now you've all had a chance to hear that work, and I encourage you to listen to the entire work. But my personal favorite, and how I got hooked on Grainger, was a piece called Children's March.
Okay.
And Children's March is technically called Children's March Over the Hills and Far Away, and it's a 2/8 march that also comes with vocal parts. The band has to sing while they actually play. And I'm going to let Chris just splice in a little bit of this here. But when you do this, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to the work and think of the title, Children's March.
Okay.
Over the Hills and Far Away. and see if you can hear it in this recording, the joy of a child, the choice. He uses xylophones and not bells. He uses wood mallets and dowels versus soft yard mallets. He uses mutes that most people didn't even own mutes back then. And see if you can find the uniqueness in the sound of Children's March.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and cue it up. Let's see. Now, with all of this genius, you would think that this person had been trained in music in an incredibly formal way, but as far as I understand, that's not really the case for Mr. Grainger. It sounds like most of his
he's a savant. He was a prodigy.
Right.
And, I didn't know how much of a prodigy he was until somewhere along the line years ago, I came across, there's a piece called Molly on the Shore, and it's almost impossible to play if you're a clarinet player because it's so fast and so rapid and so articulation. And I came across a recording of him playing it on piano when he composed it. I didn't know a human being could play piano that fast. I've never seen anything like it in my life. He was, and I guess, when you look at the geniuses, the true geniuses, and, especially artistic geniuses, they're almost always troubled, aren't they?
Yeah, that's certainly very true. Now, so why do you want me to give let's give our audience a little color in terms of who he is, where he comes from, all that stuff. So, born George Percy Grainger, July 8th, 1882 in Melbourne, Australia. His father, John, was a heavy drinker and womanizer who fathered a child in England before the marriage with Rose, who was his mother, discovered after Percy's birth that she had contracted syphilis from her husband.
And think about syphilis back then. It drove you mad.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't, take penicillin and you live with it. It was going to kill her. So she handled that by leaving her son like a 6-word note and jumping off a building. She committed suicide.
What?
Yeah, she committed suicide.
She left him
but this wasn't till after. Now, I'm not saying this to be salacious, Chris. Okay. I'm not saying this.
Okay.
And I've not been able to fully document this, but she did this after they had a consensual relationship that went on for years. To what level? I mean, he owned 70 whips. So, but he was deeply in love with his mother. His mother homeschooled him. He never went to a public school.
Right.
And so his mother was the only figure in his life, morning, noon, and night, from birth until she killed herself.
Yeah, so except for 3 months of formal schooling, Percy was educated entirely at home. He was homeschooled. He was bullied basically when he went to school, so that didn't last very long, right? So he did mostly an informal education, being homeschooled. From his earliest lessons, Percy developed a lifelong fascination with Nordic culture.
Yeah, he was obsessed with Finland and Switzerland, and the funny part is I don't hear it reflected in any of his music. Almost all his music has an Australian or a British tilt to it, but he was obsessed with Nordic culture.
And artistically, he said it influenced him tremendously, right? That's his.
I'd like to hear it. I wish you were sitting here so I could ask him some of these questions. But he then did get some formal training in Berlin, I believe, is where he went to Germany and got some formal training. But keep in mind, formal training in this would have been, when was he born?
He was born in 1882. So
probably formal training would have been right around 1900.
Yep.
Yeah, 1900.
Yep.
Formal music theory training 140 years ago was not what it is today. And so if you listen to the music of that time period, you would hear Beethoven and you hear major chords and some minor chords and maybe some seventh chords, but very standard progressive instrumentation, very standard harmonies, very standard voice leading and voicing activities. And then you listen to Grainger's stuff and you realize he was decades ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Decades ahead of his time. So Percy Aldridge Grainger kind of was a bridge gap between the old school of, let's say, Beethoven,
right,
and the new school of Schoenberg and Bernstein and the folks who came on in the mid 20th century, in the 1940s, 1950s. He was that bridge gap. And he was the first person to look at a band and not see it as a marching band and say, oh, instead of the same instrument, 5 different sizes, violin is a wood string instrument, viola, wood string instrument, cello, wood string instrument, bass, wood string instrument, double bass. It's the same tonality.
Yeah.
He was the first one to look at the band culture and go, oh, all these different textures and tonalities and materials, I can do things I can't do with an orchestra. I can make sounds that I can't make with he was so bizarre. He made up his own language. And so you and I would.
Sorry, he what?
He would. Oh, yeah. So if you go and read, and to this day, if you go by Children's March, it doesn't say forte or fortissimo. It says Loudon.
And that's supposed to be in substitute of
a louder. Yeah. He just made up words.
Interesting.
And so if you look at a piece, you'll see words that are nonsensical and you're like, oh, it must be a foreign language. It is. It's one he made up in his head.
Interesting.
I mean, this is a guy, when he would compose, would walk down 4-lane freeways with cars going 60 miles an hour on each side of him, and compose in his head.
Yeah.
I mean, he was not a normal dude.
And I want to just to take a step back. So you talked about his formal music training coming from basically, being included in or going to this piano conservatory in Germany, right? So around that time, so we're talking about a kid in the 13 years old, whatever,
Mozart level.
Right. In the 1890s, in a piano conservatory in Germany.
And probably outplaying everyone at 13.
Just the pressure alone from a situation like that seems insane. So I wonder if his controversial home life or the pressure he had dealing with all the insanity in his own household, maybe this was a relief to some extent. I just can't imagine the pressure that somebody like that faced in a situation like that.
And he was not a shy man. He knew he was that good.
Really?
I mean, he was not a shy. He, like I said, they didn't find the whips. He bequeathed them because he was proud of them and told them that in his museum, he wanted a room specially built to house his whip collection. And he made them himself from I'm told he has a whip made of batons that he conducted with. Now,
how does that even work?
I don't know, Chris. I don't have any whips.
If I can find a picture of this, folks, I'll try and include it somehow
there has to be
show notes somewhere. But maybe we can find the whole collection. Maybe I can share some sort of clip or something from the whole collection itself. That's absolutely crazy. So he goes to Germany. He's a piano prodigy at this age, right? What happens next? Like, how does he develop from there? Where does he go?
He traveled the world because he was a prodigy. I mean, you just heard the guy play. I mean, like I said, Molly on the Shore, if we can find it, I didn't think a human being could play that fast on a piano. And so as he traveled the world, he developed a love for folk songs. And so almost everything that he wrote, I shouldn't say that, everything that I've been exposed to that that he wrote is based on a folk song. So he does a ton of Australian, he has Australian upcountry tune, Australian walking song, Australian folk songs. He has Irish tune from County Derry over from England. He has Lincolnshire Posy, the 5 movements from England. So he immersed himself in that British folk literature, that English countryside sound, which obviously bled over into Australia because it's a European colony.
Yeah.
And that's where he lived for the entirety of his career.
Gotcha.
I mean, and he did it in a very modern, quirky, bizarre way, but he basically took centuries old folk songs and reinterpreted them in a new way, in a new idiom, for new instruments that had never been played before.
I'm trying to even wrap my head around the complexity of at that time, that time itself in the early 1900s, let's say, living in Australia, just how much more isolated that would be based on what travel was available at that time. For him to be this big and this well known.
He didn't go anywhere quick.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
He did spend residencies. He and Aaron Copland were very close. Legend has it, very close. He was a practicing bisexual. He was very open about it.
Okay. I was going to say, my understanding is when we talk about him being famous for the time in music, he took advantage of it, and from what I understand, he wasn't a bad-looking guy either. He had some other stuff going for him. That's what I understand. The description that we read was golden hair was almost admired as much as the strength and vigor of his playing. So he had looks to go with the talent, basically.
And and the thing is, he had the intellect to go with the looks and the talent, and he had the soul. So there's a piece, probably his second most famous work or third most famous work, depending who you ask, would be a tune called Irish Tune from County Derry. And I was talking to a fellow colleague of mine years ago. I was going to program it. I had really good horns. I thought we could play the snot out of it. And he said, I refuse to play that with high school kids. And I said, why? He said, high school kids haven't experienced enough pain in their life to be able to do that piece justice.
That's a fair point.
And I was like, wow. Yeah. I had never thought of it about that way. So this would be a great place to maybe weave in 40 seconds of Irish Tune from County Derry.
Okay, you
by
got
Percy Grainger.
Absolutely.
It's good stuff.
So this is all good information, and I think we're just kind of reiterating, again, how ahead of his time he was and his genius and all that stuff. But what about more of what's some more of the quirky stuff? I think that's we want to fill in for people. Not just he was a genius, but what was some of the different, interesting kind of quirky stuff about him? Like, again, you talked about the way he tuned things or played things. Maybe he got creative with what he played with. Like, what are some more quirky things?
Whips.
Does he have a song with whips in it?
With his mother. I mean, I don't know. It gets much more quirky than that. They say that. So she jumped off an 18-story building after it became public that they had a relationship, and he was said to have been in love romantically with his mother.
Okay,
and that was his choice of a life partner. That's pretty quirk. The way he composed, he would place himself in utter chaos to find peace. And he did that pretty consistently. He didn't go to a quiet room, and he would put himself in very chaotic situations and somehow be able to tune everything out so that he could hear something in his head that no one else could hear. And I always thought that, and he was known to go on these walkabouts for days. And he would come home with the piece finished in his head and just sit down and put it on manuscript. But he would start walking down a freeway and maybe be 60 miles in, the piece finished before he turned around and walked home. And he'd be gone 2 or 3 days, having done nothing but walk down a freeway in the middle of the Australian outback country.
That's insane, yeah.
It's crazy. I don't know how he lived. I don't know how he did it.
And it's to your point. So even outside of just the way that he would go about his process, I believe I read that he used some interesting instrumentation as well. So
he created his own instruments.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he would hear a sound in his head, and then if there wasn't an instrument, so he had an instrument called the kangaroo pouch.
Yeah.
Don't ask me.
What's the kangaroo pouch?
Because it didn't catch on, Chris, so I didn't learn how to play it in college.
See a lot of the kangaroo pouches these days,
it's a shortage of kangaroos willing to give up their pouches. I don't even know if he uses a kangaroo pouch.
Right.
He developed free music machines. He developed a piano that was tuned in 1/6 of a step. So a white key to a white key in general, if it has a black key in between, is a whole step.
Okay.
He tuned them in 1/6 of a step.
What does that even sound like? I wonder. I'm trying to imagine. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around what that would even.
We'd have to go to his museum. He has two museums. He has one in America.
Okay.
One houses his library of written works, and I believe it's in Texas, at the University of Texas. And then his personal library is where his home is in Australia, and that's where you got to go see the whips.
They don't have the whips at the University of Texas.
No, they do not have the whip. I don't think they do.
But in addition to creating instruments in that way, I also read that he had maybe some influence on early like electronic music in a way. Like he was doing stuff way ahead of his time. So I think sometime in the even the late 30s, we talked about machines. He was finding ways to create sounds electronically, which if you think about the timing of that, that's just, I don't know. That's insane.
The ability to build it.
Right. Like, absolutely.
I mean, you're talking about a guy who's a savant on the piano, is the world's preeminent composer, is smarter than three people put together, is a creative genius, and he can come up with ideas and build instruments on his own.
Which I think speaks to probably why he's held in the regard that he is now, because he didn't believe in convention.
No,
it sounds
no,
like, right? He very much.
And he believed his lack of convention applied to his private life as it did to his musical life. And he believed the two were intertwined, that the more creative he was in the bedroom, the more creative he was on the podium. That's what he believed.
Okay.
So he was not shy about saying, this is who I am privately. This is what I like. This is what I want to do. This is who I want to spend time with, because he believed if he wanted that type of musical creativity, he had to have that type of personal creativity.
Do we know?
Is he wrong?
Well, no, not necessarily. But again, I'm trying to think about just this time frame in history and how he would have been received. Like,
that's a great question.
But today, no, I could see him getting away with it. But again, one of the other things that I know that came up in the reading about him was some of those things that he was kind of seminally known for, which were maybe even a little bit earlier on in his career, like you mentioned, Country Gardens, for example, was something that he didn't really enjoy. He came to almost despise later on, because I think it was almost too conventional or traditional for him. So
it was probably too broadly accepted.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Yeah. So I almost wonder if that was part of why he acted that way, was because
that's a great question.
Push back a little bit, and I wonder if he was he as openly accepted the more he continued to put himself out there. I wonder.
And I've never heard, his list of colleagues and friends was a who's who in the music community. Because
who would that be?
It's Debussy, Grieg, Vaughan Williams. I don't know if Holst, they wrote at the same time, but it would have been at the end of Holst's life and the start of his. So I don't know if they were friends or colleagues, but he was, when someone's brilliant. Look at Michael Jordan.
I was going to say, I'm just going to nod along with those names because I have no frigging clue who any of those people are, but I'll just nod along. Like,
Think about Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
The more we learn about Michael Jordan after his playing career is over, is he was a pretty horrific human being. He was not kind.
The more we
Let's
learn
put
about
it that
most
way.
people, that comes to be true.
But my point is, when you're that good at something, people are willing to forgive a lot.
That's an excellent point.
So I
That's
think
an excellent point.
His genius was so obvious that people were willing to just ignore the quirk. I mean, because they wanted to be a part of that orbit, that mind train, that thought process. But I mean, there's nothing like his music. To this day, even, most people, when you're done with Michael Jordan, you can say, well, but look at Kobe. And after Kobe, you can say, look at LeBron, the next Michael.
Okay.
To my way of thinking, there's no next Grainger.
There wasn't another.
There was one Grainger. And there are people who write with his tonality, but don't write with his voice. And for those who don't understand, when I say voicing, it's what instruments you choose to put together and in what octave or space on the instrument, because the saxophone has a very different sound, or a clarinet has a very different sound in the low register, the shallow register, than the high register. So tradition might go, well, the clarinet should play way up here. And he would say, no. What if we take that line and drop it 3 octaves, give it to the third clarinet in the shallow register and match it with a xylophone? What would that... His voicing to this day, there is nothing like it. And he's my favorite composer ever to have written.
Do you think the point was just to be contradictory, or do you really think, I don't know, I'm trying to as we're talking about it, I'm trying to listen and understand, did he really just buck tradition in that way, or was it truly like his head just heard it differently and it had a different presentation? I don't know. Maybe a combination.
I think the latter.
Yeah.
I think he was uncompromising. Well, if there's not an English word that describes what I want, then I'll invent the word. I simply must have the right word, the perfect word for the perfect moment, for the perfect voicing of the perfect melody. I think, honestly, he was a perfectionist to the point where it had to contribute to his mental illness. I mean,
interesting.
Anyone who is that much of a perfectionist, and I'm trying to think of other idioms, and I don't know why it comes up. Robin Williams is who comes up first. Okay. Someone who is just... if you've ever seen Robin Williams just riffing, he is brilliant.
Right.
And I think with that brilliance, it's troubling to the mind.
Gotcha. Or that the underlying troubled mind, I guess, is almost looking for an escape in some way that ends up being, that creative genius. I think, because that troubled mind, I think, existed for somebody like Robin Williams well before I think he gained fame for, his talents, right? I think one maybe almost drives the other. And as we talked about in the way Percy Grainger grew up with what sounded like a very troubled household and just kind of some controversy himself.
I don't know how you grow up in that household and you're not mentally ill. Now, set aside his genius, his genius. But if he was just an average kid, that kid's going to need a lot of therapy. Middle school would be very hard for that kid.
What does mental illness look like, right? How is it identified? Is it clinical at that point in time? Is it clinical, or is it truly just tied to, is mental illness only something that is a ride along because of syphilis or something else? Like do people even distinguish the fact that mental illness is its
My
own
guess is back
clinical...
then they called him a genius. They called him quirky. They didn't use the term mental illness.
Right.
Because it was 1900.
Right.
If you were cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and they put you in a white jacket, that's mental illness back then. But if you were a functioning human being, you could feed yourself, bathe yourself, clothe yourself, provide for yourself. I don't think they saw him as mentally ill. I think they saw him as weird, but I don't know how you can look. He wanted to display his own skeleton in the museum. His museum, his instructions upon death were wait 10 years to open both this vault and my casket, and then put us both on display. And they rejected the desire for him to be on display as a corpse.
Wait, they can reject that even if that's his wish? Who rejected that? I'm just curious. Not that I want to see it, but I just want to know for myself. Like if I ever have a plan one day to display my skeleton,
no skin. What was it?
I would assume it decomposes, and what is that? Is that uncontrolled? Anyway, that's a different.
I don't know, but that's for someone to think of their death and plan. Okay, here's where I want the whips to go. Here's where I want my skeleton to go. Like that's not a dumb human being.
Yeah, here's the fact that Scott is mentioning is in 1956, he deposited a mysterious locked chest marked private matters in a Melbourne bank vault with instructions do not open until 10 years after his death. So there was something that he hid away in this bank vault specifically and said don't until 10 years after his death, which was, when did he pass away? I don't know if I have that in front of me, but it sounds like
we don't have it in front of us. I think he passed away. I think he passed away in the late 40s.
Okay.
I don't think he made it to the 50s. And if he was born, when was he born? 1888?
1882.
1882. So I think he died in his 50s. So that'd be even maybe the 1930s.
Gotcha. So the note that we have about the vault item says when researchers opened it in 1971, they found over 70 homemade whips, some fashioned from conductors' batons, an extensive pornography collection, and candid photographs documenting his fetish and bondage experiments. So, yeah, he had an interesting private life. For sure.
Was it private? He had an interesting life. I don't know if it was that private.
I guess I'm saying he wanted this to be locked away.
The lust branch at the University of Melbourne's library.
The Grainger Museum at the University of Melbourne. I would love to hear. We occasionally get some Australia listens.
James Kukulis, if you're listening.
James, if you've been, or if anybody maybe has traveled and experienced this, I would love some firsthand knowledge. Maybe I should go. Maybe there's like a YouTube walkthrough of the museum or something. But
there's got to be. That's a great question.
Really, really curious. If I find it, I'll link that too, just so people can kind of experience what that looks like. Because I'm going to guess what's at the University of Texas is probably pretty tame.
It's mostly his musical scores, archival recordings, manuscripts, those sorts of things. That's what I believe is in the museum. I believe it's at the University of Texas. It's called the Grainger something or other at the university. I believe that's where it is.
Gotcha.
But
interesting.
If I'm wrong, someone can write in and correct us and tell us where that is, and we'll put it in the show notes. If I could just circle back, if he were live today, what I would want to ask him is the question you asked, which is, did you hear it in your head first?
Right.
And then put it to paper, or did you have to take something else you heard and tweak it? Like, how did those sounds come to you and to no one else since or before?
Right. Because the one thing that I appreciate the most about when we talk about him is that, like you said, the process of him observing something or being a part of it, putting himself in a situation where he found inspiration where a lot of others probably traditionally would not. And I think that's incredibly brilliant. But yeah, I'm curious if a lot of, like I said, is a lot of it just to be the antithesis of this is how other people do it. So I'm not going to do it that way. I want to do it differently. And here's how my approach is going to be.
And it's probably a little bit of both. The contrarian and the genius, meet together, because a genius doesn't think anybody can think the way they think. So they have to be different. I would think. I'm not a genius, so I wouldn't know for sure, but
selling yourself short again, Scott Lang. Selling yourself short. Is there, well, I guess I was just going to ask you a question. Is there things about your personal life that we should know so we can understand the genius that is Scott Lang?
Listen, you have to wait 10 years until after my death.
But then you like, do I get to be like, who takes care of the chest, the locked chest? Where's that going to go?
Whoever does will need years of therapy afterwards, Chris. Years and years of therapy.
4 kids. And so as we learned, folks, one of the things you learned in this story is that if you're interested in displaying your skeleton publicly, unfortunately, that is seen as public indecency. You are not allowed to
in Australia. And I thought anything was, what happens down under stays down under.
Maybe because it's anonymous, but don't medical colleges use real skeletons? Am I under the wrong impression? I
maybe because they're not displayed. I don't know.
I guess that's a good question because it's not. No, but wait, hold on. And I'm trying to think of the name of it, and I probably should Google this so I can come up with the name of it. But I know for a fact because I used to live near Philadelphia, and there's a museum that people see as like an oddities museum, but it's like a medical museum where you can literally go and there's like organs and jars and stuff that they've preserved. That's part of like a display. So I guess I'm having a hard time saying this guy wanted a skeleton. Why not?
It was 1930 when he died. Things were a little more traditional, so to speak.
Okay, so what do you think? The Bandad start a petition, right? Do we start a petition to bring Percy Grainger's skeleton?
I want it up here in my
the way
office,
he wanted it,
right here. If you're watching on YouTube, right in between Chris and I, we want Percy Grainger's skeleton and at least one whip. I think that's not too much to ask. He has 70. That would still leave 69 of them.
If you guys are really us, what number are we thinking of? 69, dudes!
Oh my gosh.
I'm just saying,
you're not
right
wrong.
here, it could be our...
Leah, I'm so sorry. At some point, your house is going to be haunted by the skeleton of Percy Grainger.
If we're going to be haunted, I should
be him.
It would be Percy Aldridge Grainger. It would I would stay up at night to chat with him.
You would hear some noises. I'm sure they might be interesting noises too.
Lady.
But so to that point though, let's talk about today. I guess the question is today, and obviously things are very, very different. I wonder if he would be as open, because to your point, at some point he defined for people, if you're going to accept my genius, you have to accept that this is a part of it, which is all of those personal. We call them personal exploits, which it sounds like for Percy they may not have been personal. Really,
they were just exploits.
They were pretty public, right? I wonder again. And again, I don't know if we can draw any equivalents to this, maybe not necessarily, but I feel like there are people who sometimes we let get away with things based on them producing something that is popular, a lot of people like, or
you
mentioned Michael Jordan,
Marilyn Manson, Kiss.
Okay.
I mean, Kiss is a perfect example of people that just bucked a trend, Now, I wouldn't call them geniuses with genius marketers.
No.
But my point is there are equivalents, I think, in Banksy.
Okay.
Would be, to me, someone who is of that level of an artist and an intellect. But
does Banksy have this outgoing? Does Banksy have done these like personal escapades in a very public way?
No, we don't even know who Banksy is.
Let's just be honest. Today, the word is canceled, right? These people would be canceled for doing
100%.
Right?
And he was a racist, by the way. We haven't mentioned that.
Oh, boy.
Well, let me put it this way. He very much loved the Nordic culture, which is about as white as it gets. And he was known to not have favorable or use unfavorable language about mixed races, people of color. He was not shy about his beliefs.
And he went to Australia, where there's a lot of people of that nature that are native to that area that, interesting. Again, I guess where I'm going with this, and we don't necessarily have to ask this question right now, but again, I think that, we can even go specific to music, but I think there are people that, and I can think of it. There's music artists growing up that there was music that I just absolutely loved. That's a huge part of who I am and who I grew up with, that you find out, unfortunately, generally after the fact, that they did a lot of things that you probably wouldn't be okay with personally. And then the question is again, is it okay then to still consume the art? Do you draw the line there?
That's a different podcast, and one that will most assuredly get us canceled.
All right.
But I do think...
I'm not saying we have to answer the question, but it's something I think people struggle with sometimes.
It's a great point, because I would argue if we're gonna judge the art by the person, then we have to let Shakespeare go.
Yeah,
we have to let Beethoven go.
No, I get it.
We have to let Mozart go.
Right.
And my theory is simply this: if I'm not teaching about the person, but I'm teaching about the art, then I think you're justified in using art from someone whose personal beliefs may not have been something that you're aligned with.
Sure.
If you're teaching about the person, but selectively not teaching about the whole person, then that's not okay. But when I chose music, I chose it based on the quality of the music, not the person who composed it.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think that's a good way to look at it.
I do want to kind of come back full circle to the start, which is, while there's certainly some curiosities, there's certainly some oddities, there's certainly some questionable proclivities, Percy Aldridge Grainger, this is a podcast about informing, is the preeminent composer in the band space, period, the end, full stop.
Sure.
And so, folks, you've had a chance to listen to Lincolnshire Posey. You've had a chance to listen to Children's March, which is my personal favorite and was my gateway drug to Grainger, was Children's March.
Yeah.
And we talked about Irish Tune from County Derry. That as we wind this up, I'm going to ask Chris to drop in something that we mentioned before. But as you roll credits, why don't you drop a little Molly on the Shore on the audience?
Molly on the Shore,
which is my second favorite piece that he ever wrote. So having said that, we celebrate the artist, we celebrate the person, but we celebrate you. We wanted to give you something as a part of this Offbeat, off-topic podcast series, as we want to introduce you to some of the more colorful characters associated with this activity.
But I think that's a good point for the point that we just talked about, to say it's a different podcast. I think it's fair to say we can talk about the art as long as we're not trying to hide the other parts, right? As long as we're being clear about there's a lot of messed up stuff here, folks. And I think that's really what it comes down to for any similar situation is as long as you're not trying to hide the fact that all of these other things occurred, then certainly appreciate the influence and the genius for what it was, because as Scott's talked about, there's just some things that probably wouldn't have come to fruition if it weren't for individuals like this and their impact and their influence on the world of music itself. So yeah, I'm glad that we got to open this series with Percy Grainger. We're going to have...
Okay, let me ask you a question,
many
Chris.
more. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If he were alive today...
Yes.
Now, we've talked about band being a safe space.
Yes.
Band being a place where you can be yourself.
Yes.
Would you have him as a clinician for your son or daughter's band?
I feel like there's probably other individuals I would seek out first, just based on the sheer controversy. It sounds like most of the topics that we're talking about are more adult than I would want to expose a group of kids to. So, see, a clinician at a higher level potentially, right? If you need a clinician to come work with some sort of, symphony that's maybe of higher age, older, like adults of some sort, maybe. But this might be one of those times where I insulate kids a little bit from just, let's be honest. Here's the problem today, Scott. There's no question in my mind. Every single kid would be fully aware of what this man's life is like outside of his music. And they probably wouldn't be able to get it past that. I'm just going to be honest. They'd probably be so fixated on this person being outrageous in their personal life and being so worried about what people say about them on social media and on TikTok and all that stuff that they probably couldn't even get past the fact that there's probably a handful of them that would appreciate
the music. That's a really interesting point.
But they would probably be more caught up in the fact that, again, it's the same idea.
It's salacious.
Correct. And I think that's probably more what would pique their interest, if I'm just being honest. Just a group of kids, but...
So if you have something you'd like us to do a deep dive into, and I think the one rule we haven't talked about, this ground rule, is they can't be alive. Okay. Because I don't want to talk about someone who's alive.
That's fair. Yep.
But if there's something you'd like us to do a deep dive into, or a subject you'd like us to talk about, or a historical something that happened in the band world, let us know. Yeah. And we'll make it a part of a future Offbeat episode. But in the meantime, I'm Scott Lang.
Chris Flynn.
And we're the
Band Dads. Folks, if anybody has any connections that can help us access Percy Grainger's skeleton, again, I'd like to see what we can work out for that. But no, as always, if you
partial skeleton, would you take a partial?
Yes, just send me the skull. That's fine. If you have any thoughts or questions or maybe requests.
Now I have questions. You think he's weird because he had 70 whips and you want to walk around with his head in your pocket?
Yeah, you just put the skull in your desk. Maybe put some pens in the eye holes or something. Anyway, if you have thoughts or requests for maybe who we should do in the future for a series like this, as always, the best way to get a hold of us and have a conversation is our email, which is feedback@banddadspodcast.com. So shoot us an email. You can still find us on all of our social media with the Band Dads Pod on TikTok. You can find the Band Dads Podcast on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, and all that fun stuff as well. So connect with us. This is one of those things that we're hoping inspires some additional fun conversations outside of just the direct, here's how to operate your band, but here's some fun stuff to understand why this is an interesting world to be a part of. So there you go. Thanks, Scott, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, I wonder if we're still going to have that PG rating.
Band Dads on 3! 1, 2, 3, Band Dads!
Band Dads are a proud partner of Booster Hub. Simplify your Booster Club's management with Booster Hub's all-in-one tools. Find out more and get your free trial started by visiting boosterhub.com. The Band Dads Podcast is a 5 Deuce Media production. For more information, please visit 5deucemedia.com. For more information on Scott Lang leadership and solutions for music education, please visit scottlang.net.